Awesome.
Right.
All right. All right, Dereth. Well, thank you again for taking the time to meet with us. And we're looking forward to hearing all you have to share about neurodiversity. And again, thank you for sharing all your knowledge with us here.
Oh, I'm happy to help. Hopefully I can. And I didn't figure out before we got started how to get that in the chat, but there will be a handout follow-up. Looks like this for those that want it, just as some backup information. And then I'm happy to send out my Google Slides too. All right, let me get y'all situated where I can see my screen. All right. Well, as Mr. Jason said, my name is Dereth Atkins. I know Aaron Wilding Martin. We met, I was trying to figure out when we met, Aaron. I feel like it was 7th grade.
Probably, yeah.
Went to high school together. We're friends in high school, of course. Had a lot of mutual friends in middle school, and I think we became better friends in high school. So we've known each other a long time. And the goal of this training is to give you kind of an overview of autism specifically, and how it affects an individual, and some ideas of maybe some best practices that I found to be helpful as a parent of a child, well, an adult child now with autism. I have 3 kids. My oldest is Spencer. He's the one that made me an expert, so to speak, on this topic. He's on the spectrum and has a lot of other health issues. And he is, I think I said this, he's 23. I have a 21-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son. So the older 2 are out of the house. So almost being an empty nester is very weird. I wanted to start out with, and my slides are very simple. I don't really like to feel like I only look at the slides. So, but the National Professional Development Center on Inclusion is a very reputable source for inclusion ideas. And they define inclusion as a value. Inclusion as a value supports the rights of all children, regardless of abilities, and of course I'd say people, to participate actively in natural settings within their communities. Natural settings are those in which the child or person would spend time had he or she not had a disability. And I think that I really like this definition because it talks and speaks to the ministry that we're all trying to do, to support families that are trying to bring their kids to church, or their teenagers to church, or they are bringing their children or teenagers to church, and it's either maybe not going as well as they'd hoped, or that the kids aren't making friends, like just things like that, that we're trying to coordinate these efforts a little more. And these are all things that we've done with Spencer. So, and inclusion is the process of identifying, understanding, and breaking down the barriers to that participation. And it's not necessarily just a set of strategies. It is about belonging. It is about making our environments suitable for someone who has neurodiversity. Now, people first language is something that is kind of was in for a long time in the disability world. And I still think is very applicable, because sometimes it's challenging to even know how to start the conversation. And you don't want to offend somebody like right off the bat, right? And so I think this is a safe way to go. There are definitely adults with developmental disabilities and neurodiversity who reference themselves as autistic or disabled or use some of these terms. It's kind of like, that's fine for them. For the rest of us, tread lightly, right? And that's where people first language comes in. I think this is the safest way to approach the situation. And so you might notice that all of these examples use the person's name first, right? People first. So for instance, like my daughter has life-threatening food allergies. Her name is Sammy. I would not refer to her as Sammy the allergic, personally. That's not the most important part about her. My mother had type 2 diabetes. I never once called her Leona the diabetic, right? That wasn't the biggest piece of her life. And it affected her life in many, many ways. But I think that the best way to approach this conversation from the standpoint that a leadership within a church is approaching a family, for instance, is to lean on people first language. Steve has a disability. Mary uses a wheelchair or sits in a wheelchair. Spencer has autism. That's my son's name, so I threw that in there. Accessible parking rather than handicap parking. And Stacy has an intellectual disability instead of mentally retarded, which we all kind of know that that is an old term. There's a big push maybe 5 years ago, and it was called, there's a campaign, now I'm gonna lose it, but it was spread the word to end the word, end, END, the word. And a bunch of teenagers set it up and gave away a bunch of cool stuff and money and everything in these campaigns in high schools to like spread the word to end the word retarded, get it out of our cultural vernacular. LD, that's dating myself. That's what we said back in the day. Jack has a learning disability. And then I even stay away from high or low functioning. I get this question. People find out about my son and they automatically think of the Good Doctor, or they think of Rain Man, or they think of like these savant or unique characters that we know and associate with autism. And I don't like to worry too much about that stuff. If someone has high functioning or low functioning, it's not really about that for me. I think that each individual case has to be looked at like it is an individual. You've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and you can fill in the blank. ADHD. A lot of these things I'm going to talk about also apply really well to ADHD because they're kind of very similar, and they have what similar comorbidities is what they call them in the psychiatric world, to where like they have depression, anxiety, OCD, all of those similar symptoms, so to speak, or characteristics. And a lot of folks have both autism and ADHD. It's very common. While we're defining, I won't read this whole thing, but basically autism is part of a group of disorders known as autism spectrum disorders. And that's why I was saying like it's this big umbrella of like some people are here, you get them all around this mix. 1 in 54 individuals are diagnosed with autism. And that's a huge number. When Spencer was diagnosed at age 3 or 4, I think he was almost 4, officially diagnosed, there were 1 in 500. And and he's 23, right? So it's 20 years ago, 1 in 500. So it isn't that we have a widespread issue happening suddenly about autism and autism spectrum disorders. It's that we have better diagnostics and we're helping more people. And so we're more aware. But autism does affect a person's ability to communicate and relate to others, and is sometimes often associated with these rigid routines and repetitive behaviors and like obsessive compulsive, like lining things up and not being able to change their routines that they're in, or like I always do this on Tuesdays, so I have to do this no matter what, and that kind of mentality. My last sort of definition is the definition of fair, and I get on my soapbox about this one so much. Fair is what's right for the individual. This is my definition. No book told me this, but fair, it would not be fair for my daughter to get cheesy popcorn to be able to sit in our church class for kids at my church. She doesn't need it. It's what's right for the individual, regardless of what the group needs or feels is socially appropriate. Spencer needed cheesy popcorn and crayons and birthday candles and any sticker or anything else that could help him, whatever obsession he had, whatever it was, helped him stay in that class and behave appropriately and get something out of it was fair. If he didn't need those things anymore, then it wouldn't be fair anymore. So jumping off my soapbox, but that's what that's the big one for me. So we talked about how there's these characteristics of autism, right? So socialization, communication, those routines and structures. There's also a lot of sensory issues and like fine and gross motor issues. I'm not going to go into all those in depth, but one of the things that I thought would be helpful is like under socialization, what I've noticed with people on the spectrum, I know a handful beyond my son, and I've attended a lot of trainings. I've done, I think, pretty much every training my area in St. Louis has to offer over the years. And I also graduated from the Missouri Partners in Policymaking. Every state has one. And I would encourage, if you know parents who have children on the spectrum or any kind of developmental disability, to do that training. It's for adult self-advocates, and it's for parents who are advocates for their children. And it's called Partners in Policymaking. And the idea is that we get to advocate at a state level for change. And we learn all there is to know about that, but we also learn, it's like a 10-month, you go for the weekend once a month for like 10 or 11 months. And it's a huge, it's like a master's program in public advocacy. So it's just wonderful. You have to like submit a proposal to be able to attend, but it's great. But basically, the socialization piece of autism isn't just like understanding social cues or keeping eye contact. It's those relationships, right? It's the making friends and how literal thinking gets in the way of making friends and making those emotional connections with people. And that lack of awareness affects their social emotional well-being because they're not making those connections and they don't know what they're doing wrong. And it's very heartbreaking, I think. So the social piece, I should call that social emotional because it's so hard. The structures that a lot of people with autism have to have in place are very restrictive and repetitive, and they want to see the patterns in life, and they find great comfort in those patterns. And they also have, a lot of times people with autism have very specific activities and interests. I mentioned birthday candles. My son loved birthday candles. I don't know why, but he would walk down to the Dairy Queen multiple times in his young childhood. Our 6-year-old would walk down to the Dairy Queen near our house and steal birthday candles and then walk back home. And we didn't even know he left. And that sounds like terrible parenting, but like, honestly, like he was so fast, and it was horrifying. We took pictures around our little subdivision. If you see him and he's by himself, he's not supposed to be. Communication. So echolalia is like repeating words, usually the last 3 or 4 words. Apraxia is when you can't actually speak words. A lot of times people with apraxia might have like a talker or a device. Oftentimes right now in our day, it's iPads that speak for them. The eye contact piece, being able to have conversations and comment back and forth is a major issue. And then of course, the typical like speech delays or inability to form words. And a lot of people have speech language therapy. The sensory sensitivities is such an interesting one. It's not just the 5 senses. And I have a whole other talk that just focuses on sensory problems. But it's also like the vestibular and proprioceptive systems. And there's probably people that know a lot more about that than me in this Zoom meeting even. But basically it's kind of like where you are in space. So like I'm sitting in this chair and I know my feet are on the ground and I don't need any other input to know that I'm safe, to know that I'm like not going to fall. Those of us who do know, especially children with autism, notice that they toe walk. They're tiptoeing through life because they don't know that they're really safe on the planet. Like they don't understand like how much space they take up, and that because this vestibular and like proprioceptive system is just skewed in their brains. And I just find that the most fascinating thing. One example of this that we had with Spencer was he was having a really hard time at school, actually sitting, and he would sit for other things. He was having a hard time. And so the OT brought in a backed chair, instead of a chair that had a hole in it, she brought a chair that had arms and complete sides, no holes. And he sat there with no problem. So it's just understanding that and the overstimulation that can come just from that, let alone if they have a tag on their shirt, or if they have like a sock that's twisted, or think of all the sensory things that we all experience. Like, it's really hard to concentrate if your eyes are dry, or if your throat hurts, or if your feet are sore. Just those, somebody's clicking their pen can be annoying. Bouncing their foot and squeaking a chair, annoying. In the autism world, it's like magnified by 1,000, right? It's just so difficult. And so the point of going over this one, especially with a whole other program, is we identify like every single sense and what that feels like. And it's best done in person because we have like special classes and we have like these special hearing things and what it feels like to stomp versus like, anyway, it's a great program. But so sensory, when we're dealing with someone on the spectrum, it's just such a important foundation to understand that they're likely in pain talking to you. The little 4-year-old that's on the floor screaming, it's likely overwhelmed by the rest of the 4-year-olds and all the noise. Other common issues, like I said, the gross and fine motor skills, like jumping or keeping their balance, but also like writing and cutting and things like that. So that's appropriate. Like if you have a young child, or even Spencer still has a hard time cutting or writing his name. So like if you're trying to do some kind of activity within your children's ministry, that'll be a time when you'll need to step in and like either do it for them or hand over hand or get it almost done. That's a lesson adaptation. Get it almost done, and then they just finish it off cutting or writing their name, or maybe they don't have to write their name, maybe they just color their name. It's very easy to do small adjustments there. Generalization is just, I feel like it's a superpower that my kid has, but because he can take something that he learned on Blue's Clues, which is still a big favorite, and apply it to his life. And he does that by that echolalia that is also this superpower. And so he memorizes it and then generalizes it to apply. So I can't think of one from Blue's Clues, but Clifford, Emily Elizabeth was mad one time and she had a journal that Jeddah had read. And she kept saying, Jeddah, a journal is private and you shouldn't have read mine. And it was this angry, like, Emily Elizabeth never got mad at anything, but she got mad about this journal. And Spencer, and it was this whole big speech, and Spencer knew the whole speech. And anytime he was upset about something or angry, he would say, a journal is private and you shouldn't have read mine. And he would get so like mad, but the emotion, like he was generalizing that emotion to be appropriate. The words were not, right? The words did not make sense for any situation that we had him in, but the emotion, he was able to convey it from something. I just think that's phenomenal. On the other hand, generalization issues, what I learn across a table from my ABA therapist or my speech therapist, I can't go into the world and do. I only know how to do it in that table, at that table, sitting at that table. So you might think that Johnny has the ability to sit still at school. He gets to church and he cannot sit still in a chair. He hasn't learned that that's the same type of environment. That's the same expectation. So a lot of eating issues, a lot of that sensory oral motor, loud vocalizations. A lot of times, if you cover your ears, you can try it. If you cover your ears and hum really loud, you won't be able to hear anything that I'm saying. And I'll keep talking in a normal tone of voice. But like, if you cover your ears as tight as you can, plug your ears and start singing or humming or making odd noises, you're gonna be able to tune everything out. And then of course, a lot of behavioral challenges, especially with the young ones. So why do they have behavior challenges? All behavior is communication. They are trying to get your attention. And it's sometimes because they want to escape. They call that eloping in the autism world, but they want to escape or avoid something. They want access to something cool, like any kid would. It's attention seeking, that sensory stimulation, the same way that they can get overstimulated, they need certain stimulation. And so they might be rocking or stemming in some way. And oh, I have a typo in there. I'm sorry. Our church, I went through and tried to find them all, but our church calls the children's ministry primary. So if you see that again, I usually give this to, well, I've given it a lot to my church and to neighboring congregations, but that use the same terminology. So, but a children's ministry is not a place that is naturally comfortable or happy for a child with autism. And so they're going to try to communicate the best they can through whatever behavior either gets them out, gets them attention in some way, or gets them that sensory stimulation that they need. Or you might just have a fun toy at the front of the room that they want to play with. And so then comes in the reinforcement. So power of the reinforcer. And you can answer this question, any of these questions that you feel like you want to, or I can give you the answers. But why do you stay in a job you hate? Hopefully we all have jobs that we love, but why do people stay in a job that they hate? Anybody know? Anybody have a thought?
Money.
Money, right? They got to pay the bills. They have children or pets or other things that want to be fed. And then,
avoiding change.
Yeah. Why do you cook dinner when you don't want to? Why do you make your toddler take a nap? You know, why do we do things like this? And it's because we have, well, I'm going to jump back to that slide. The primary reinforcers are food, sleep, and money. Obviously, one of those is going to be one that doesn't matter to most kids or teenagers on the autism spectrum, right? The money. Maybe they get old enough, they take an interest in money, they start to make those understanding, those connections, right? But the primary reinforcers that most people, young people on the spectrum, are looking at are food and sleep. Sleep isn't what we do when we're at church, right? Although sometimes I call that sacred sleep. Isn't that true? Fall asleep. It's blessed sleep. But so we're talking about food. Okay, if you have a kid on the spectrum bouncing off the walls like my Spencer was for so many times, food is the first stop. It does not sit well with a lot of people, but that is the first stop. That's the primary reinforcer. And then we have secondary reinforcers. So it's more like the pride in doing what's expected. You can't expect a 4-year-old on the spectrum to understand that, right? Looking forward to a preferred future thing. That's a very abstract concept for kids in general. And then maybe they know that there's consequences, right? If they don't. But again, because of those other things we talked about, the communication and socialization, and I don't remember if it was Julia or Ginger that said like the routine structure, like not wanting things to change or whatever, that gets in the way of these secondary reinforcers. Another one is token reinforcers. So it's an item that represents future reinforcement. So the secondary reinforcer of like looking forward to a preferred outcome or a consequence, that's very vague. But if a sticker chart filled up, we used to do just a plain old piece of paper on a clipboard, and when you filled your stickers on this, because I'm lazy, I didn't want to do some chart, just filled this page with star stickers, then you got a break. Or you got to have your special toy when you got home, or whatever it was. Anything can work as a reinforcer. And it's basically, it was described to me at this parent training that I went to as like a 3-week full-time thing done by it's Easter Seals Midwest now, but it was the Judavine Center here in St. Louis. But basically that training, they're like, anything that your child will do cartwheels for, talk to the parents, find out what is the thing. And then you have to start getting creative and talking about, well, how could we apply that? How could we make a token out of that? The bag system is pretty genius, if I say so myself. I did this with Spencer. He loved crayons and birthday candles, and they come in a box. And then, so I put them all in a bag, like a Ziploc bag, and he'd have the box for the crayons. And I just one by one hand them to him. And as he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. And then when he filled his box, we got out of there, right? It was just this token reinforcement. And when I say that we're doing what he was supposed to be doing, we have to teach. And for me, it was a visual schedule. It was I will sit in my chair with a picture of a chair. Of course, he was 3. So like, this is going to look very different depending on the ability level of the person that you're dealing with. But for him, it was like, I will sit in my chair. I will listen to the teacher. I'll keep my hands to myself. That was a big one for him. And then maybe if it's someone who's a little older or who has different needs, I'll raise my hand to speak, or I'll ask the teacher before I tell my story if there's time, or I'll, you know, maybe you have it worked out with your teacher that there's a timer, and like, we know that I like to get spinny and I get really excited about this topic if it comes up. And so 2 minutes, you get 2 minutes, right? Just talking to the kids about what the expectations are and having very simple rules, like 1 or 2 that they have to try to obtain. I'm going to go back to this function of the behavior slide. And because this is life-changing. So the functional behavioral assessment is a tool that they use in schools. And this is basically what they're looking at. They look at an antecedent, the event that happens right before the behavior that you don't like. Right? It's a fast trigger. You almost need somebody else. And I do this too. I'll come and observe and be that kind of objective observer. Observing like, oh, wait a minute. Spencer did that because the piano started playing. That was the trigger, or whatever it is. Then you have the challenging behavior, and then the consequence that immediately follows that behavior. And a consequence doesn't have to be bad, it can be good to them. And then everything that kind of sets up this perfect storm that this is likely to happen again. And so they look at all of these things. Are there similarities? It's an analysis of like, what is the reason behind this behavior? And we'll go into this more later because I have some examples. So some tips and tricks with reinforcement, keeping the reinforcement very specific, no matter the age of the child, no matter the ability of the person. We feel this way too, right? If someone just says, good job, we're like, thanks, you know, I don't know what you're complimenting me on. But somebody, nobody's ever actually said this to me, good job sitting in your chair. But if I were to say to someone with autism was having a really hard time sitting in their chair, I might say, good job sitting in your chair. I really like how you're doing that. You're really obeying that rule, you know, sitting in your chair rule, good job. Like, that is very specific. And with a literal thinker, you have to give them specifics, because if you just say good job and he was just picking his nose or something crazy, then that's what he's going to think you're saying good job about, especially if he's little. And that may or may not have happened to me, encouraging some negative behaviors going on. Start very small. So Spencer, I keep using the sitting in your chair thing, but it could be anything. This applies to everything. But if he was sitting in his chair and he's 4 years old, 5 years old, and I'm trying to get him to stay in his chair, and the best he can do is roll around on the floor, then like the second he sits in his chair, great job sitting in your chair. Let's go outside and have a snack. Good job, buddy. You sat in your chair. You did it. And then we walk out and take the break. You know? And that's what errorless learning kind of is too. Like, when you're teaching the rules or you're doing other things, what are the rules that we have for our children's ministry? They are sitting in your chair, listening to your teacher, raising your hand, whatever it is. Then you just say that. You say that to them. Oh, good job. You're learning the rules of our children's ministry. How smart you are. I love that. I love that you're learning these things. What are they again? Oh, can you help me remember? Sitting in my chair. And so you're doing all the talking. But then they're getting the reinforcement and the pride of understanding. And then when they start telling you those things is where you'll see that errorless learning, that positive reinforcement come in and be like, it just explodes out of nowhere, it seems like for me, but with the kids that I've worked with. It's really hard to do, but you reinforce only the positive. And that doesn't just mean that you're not criticizing. It means that if this kid is trying to get away and escape the room because it's too loud or overwhelming in some way, then you do not reinforce. So guess who has to come back and sit in their chair before they go outside and take a break? Or I have an example later, something specific, but you know, if someone on the autism spectrum is staring at you and doing something completely inappropriate, like maybe hitting his sister and staring at you as he's doing it, he wants attention, right? And he's sitting here like bugging his sister and staring at you. And no matter how much I want that kid's eye contact, because they don't give it very frequently, I don't look at him. I don't give him attention. I'm only going to reinforce the positive behavior. And we can do that through visual schedules and some modification of curriculum as well. And the visual schedules, a guy named Premack, what was his first name? I can't think of it. It's not Jonathan, but it's something with a J. Premack was his last name. They call this a pre-macked schedule. After you sit in your chair, then you can take a break outside in the hallway, away from the piano. Or after you clean the kitchen, might be one that I might tell myself, then I can go watch TV. Or after you do your homework, then you can play outside. Or after we have family time, then you can read your book, right? It's a liked activity followed by a disliked activity. And so this is an example of a visual schedule that we had for Spencer. The setup activity, we'd take him to go to the bathroom, get a drink. He hated music time, hated it. And so lots of unpredictability happening there and noise. And so the disliked activity was music time, but the liked activity was taking a break with his crayons. And so he would step outside in the hallway and have a break with his crayons after he'd sat for a few minutes in music time. And then we built that up. And by the end, by the time he kind of graduated onto the youth program, he was sitting in there and participating, which is phenomenal. And then followed by another disliked activity, but by a liked activity, disliked, like, you get the idea. So the next few slides I have are going to be talking about examples. And I just threw in some, I'm going to go back because I don't want it to be distracting. I threw in some that I've seen either in my own home or in other churches that I've helped. But this is an opportunity that if you have a very specific scenario, and I can do the first one and then kind of turn it over, you know, once you get an idea of what I'm talking about. But if there's a scenario that you see personally in your ministry, whether it's the youth leadership or children or adults, whatever it is, that is a challenge because of a developmental disability, specifically autism is what I know the most about. But then we can kind of talk through some of the steps that you would use to figure out the function of that behavior, right? So I'll do the example number one, and then we can kind of see if anybody else has something. And if you don't, I've got other examples that might get the ball rolling, but this is something that happened with Spencer all the time. Would anyone like to read it? You're welcome to, you don't have to. I'm happy to keep reading and being a voice here, but if you are in a position where you'd like to, that's fine too.
You can go ahead.
So class is over and it's time for music time, and Spencer starts jumping in his seat, like literally like standing on it and jumping on it. Pianist is playing the scales, Spencer's covering his ears. The warm-up begins. The music leader is this classically trained, phenomenal music leader. And she loves to teach the kids these warm-ups, like whoo, 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 whatever. I'm not trained in anything like that, so I don't know. But very like diaphragm, a lot of diaphragm exercises. And they are so excited. They're ready. And Spencer falls to the floor, starts kicking the chair in front of him, almost knocking the boy sitting there out of his seat. His teacher wasn't paying a lot of attention because at this point, she's just excited to see everything else that's happening and see the kids having fun. And then Spencer starts to scream and tries to run from the room. The teacher runs after him and reassures him that he can have a break because he obviously needs one. Okay. So there's a lot of problems with this scenario, but based on what we've learned today, I think that we can see that the trigger, the antecedent, was probably the music leader or hearing the scales or like some of the noise, right, happening with Spencer. The cues were like covering his ears, falling to the floor was a big cue, but even before that, he was maybe started covering his ears and started showing behavior that usually gets him out. So the function of this behavior is escape. He wants to leave. It's very obvious, right? And then, but can you see on there how that behavior was reinforced? We look at this again, like nobody's paying any attention to him and he's falling apart, wanting to leave, running around, screaming, running from the room. And then the teacher, like any of us would do, runs after him and tries to comfort him, right? Oh, of course you need a break, right? So those instincts are good, but when you're dealing with someone who has such concrete thinking as an individual with autism, especially a young child, but any child, it's problematic because he got what he wanted. He got the break. And as parents, we had to train him to ask for the break first when he first heard the trigger. Seeing the music teacher was the trigger. The minute they said, oh, it's time for music time, he was on the floor. He was covering his ears. He was stomping around. He was upset because he knew what was coming and he knew it was going to be painful. And so then we used to say, and I was his one-on-one for years. I would say, Spencer, I see the music teacher coming up. The piano's getting ready to start being loud and the kids are going to make funny noises. Do you want to take a break now? And he would say, yes. And before any of that crazy stuff happened with him screaming and running out of the room, we jumped in. Great. Thanks for using your words. You're doing such a great job following the rules of primary. You know this is going to be loud. Hey, let's go on outside and take a break and go get a drink of water. Or I might say, of course, I just ad-libbed one, but Spencer, you're doing a wonderful job sitting in your chair. Let's say he's still sitting in his chair. You're doing a wonderful job sitting in your chair. I'm so proud of you for following the rules. I think you've earned a break. Shall we go out and eat your snack? You really deserved it. You're doing so well. Do you see the difference between like chasing him out the door, like following him, like trying to like get him to like, because he's overwhelmed and overstimulated and has to leave, versus like breaking it, pausing it. If the function of the behavior is leaving, we don't leave. Sorry, kid, we gotta be doing something appropriate first before we leave. And it sounds so mean, but like, and you're gonna have setbacks with this because you're not trained on how to find it, but it really helps to tag team it. So like if Erin is teaching a class, maybe Jason comes in, is just observing, oh, when does Spencer get upset? Oh, it's right when the piano starts, or right when the music leader stands up, or right when that kid next to him is like in his face. Like that's where he got upset, right? Like that was the triggering behavior. That was the trigger. And if one thing I put in here in the color, if you're using token reinforcement though, make sure you're earning all those tokens before you leave. If you've promised, like once you get all your crayons back in your box or fill in the blank thing, then we'll go outside and take a break and take a walk around the building. Don't leave before you've done that. Now that might look like, great job sitting in your chair. I really like how you're listening to your teacher. You're like hurrying up and getting it done before the music leader stands up. That's fine. But your job is to make sure that the token reinforcement, whatever it is done before they leave. they're onto you. They'll find the holes in your plan. So I have more examples, but if there's a specific thing that you feel like is happening in your congregation, I'm happy to like divert to that versus like going into other examples that I have. So this is an opportunity to like brainstorm something that you're specifically dealing with, if you have it.
This is similar in some ways, but just this last week, Keegan, something had happened on the way to church that had upset her in the car. And so she was just already off when we got there and wouldn't join Sunday school. And so first we do music first. And so tried to get her into music and she wouldn't. So I was worried about the noise. So I let her wait until after music, and then she wouldn't go into the classroom. And so instead of letting her completely out of it, I had her sit in the hall, and I told her she had to sit in the hall until it was over. And if she wanted to go in, she was welcome to, but she needed to at least stay in the hall. So that was one that was kind of similar, but
yeah. So what was it in the car then?
I don't remember. I don't remember if it was her sister, or if it was something I did, or
right, because it can be anything. Spencer hates like noises like that you make absent-mindedly, like or whatever. Somebody could have like popped their gum and he would have been like, I'm done with the day. So like it could have been something very simple.
Oh, I remember what it was. She suddenly realized that she'd put on a dress and she had forgotten to put shorts on under it. And she was very upset that she had forgotten to put the shorts on under it, because that just meant her outfit wasn't quite right.
Right.
And that just threw her off.
And she was going to have to be more conscious of how she was sitting. And when we think about all the other things that Keegan might have to think about and do, even to just sit in that environment, and having those shorts on likely takes that one piece of the puzzle out of her brain on what she has to do. Right. So looking back at it, we can say, oh, yes, I can totally see how this was upsetting and how much sense it makes that of course, she was having a hard time going in, right? I think the key is, when the trigger is something that happens before an activity and kind of seems to put a damper on the whole day, is there some way, like when we realize maybe it'll be a different thing in the future, we're in the car or whatever, oh, I forgot to put on my shorts. Are we close enough to go back? Are we, can we talk through like things that you can do? You can tuck your skirt in right around your legs. You don't have to think about that if you do that. I have a pair of pants in the car from dance class. Like we just put those on instead of the skirt, like kind of problem solve prior. As if we can solve that problem in some way prior, either through giving alternative suggestions or saying the reassurance probably was not doing it, right? Like, oh, you'll be fine, was not doing it because of that concrete thinking. But it's like almost like, well, this building block of the concrete didn't work, but here's another one that's equally as good. Did you know that you could tie, I did it when I was a kid, a big puffy skirt, my mom dressed me up like a doll every day. You can actually pull it around and tie it in a knot underneath your legs, and then they won't do anything they're not supposed to do. Did you know that? And it's like, that's another building block, another strategy. In the actual situation, some of these other things might have worked, right? Like going into music time. Do you think you can go for 1 minute? What do you think you could go for 5 minutes? Do you think you could like set an alarm on your phone and do 10 minutes and then come find me and then we'll go take a break? Like those kinds of things might work for her. I don't know her well, but like from what you've said, I feel like some of those strategies of like those token reinforcers would work. Like how long can you sit in a skirt without shorts under it? What do you think? Without going crazy in your mind and obsessing, right? How long? Is it 5 minutes? Okay, great. Go do 5 minutes and come find me. I got a piece of gum for you when you're done, right? Like, or whatever it is, whatever her ability level is. So anyway, that would be my suggestion, is like, you did a great job like figuring out the cue, like, the antecedent, the trigger, but and it can be so many things. And that's the hard thing, is that like there might have been a ministry leader right there with you wanting to encourage her, but that leader had no idea what had happened in the car, right? So it may or may not have helped. You know, I've known kids on the spectrum that sound a lot like Keegan, and they would be easily distractible away from that kind of scenario if they had a very preferred conversation or activity to go into.
Yeah.
Because then it would overpower, it would be more reinforcing than being in my strict thinking. And so maybe the music leader or whoever's doing music has something that she really likes to do. If it's a bell, or if it's something, I don't know what your congregation looks like, but we have like little tools that you can use to like shake or do different things for music time. Maybe those only come out when Keegan's having a hard time going in, right? Whatever preferred thing is, right? Does that give you a few ideas?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. I have another one that's kind of similar. This is someone that is on our congregation. Her name's Mary, and she's 10, I think. But she does very well sitting in class. She wasn't like my Spencer. But when she gets excited about a topic or has something to say, she is very quick to interrupt anybody who's speaking. And then she tells long stories about these unrelated topics and starts spinning out into all these different, you know how it goes with ourselves.
This sounds like my other daughter.
Exactly.
I was like, Erin, I might know somebody like that.
So then it's hard to know how to interrupt her in a kind way, right? Because she takes over the lesson, right? And the other children are annoyed, and sometimes they're rude, and you feel kind of annoyed, and you want to be rude, you know? But you don't, because you're the grown-up, right? Like, so you have all these things going on in your head. Like, how do you even deal with that, right? And I alluded to this before, but like some solutions, like the trigger was that light bulb went off. Like, oh, I knew a kid, not Mary, but I did know a kid, like if you said the word dinosaur, forget about it. Nobody else was having anything to say for the next half an hour, right? Maybe somebody mentioned music, and that's Mary's thing. But if she's interested in a topic, because a lot of people with autism, they zero in on like 5 things that they love, right? And like they know anything and everything about these things and they want to share it, and it's this compulsive need to share. So with Mary, it was literally just if she had a story that somehow fit, somehow she wanted to share it, and it was this compulsive inability to hold it back. So she thinks of a story, has a topic, an interest, wants to share. That's the trigger. And instead of letting her jump in and share, this is what we've done. Mary, what are the rules? Primary. And I put them on the board when I was doing that. I'm the music leader in my ward, in my congregation. And so I actually put these rules on the board every week for everybody. But I'll point to it. Oh, great. I'm so glad that you have something to say, Mary. That's so cool. Kindly remember that when we want to speak in this class, we raise our hands. Thank you. And then she will pause now. She'll take a breath to raise her hand. And all I have to do is point to the rules. It took a while to get there, but
does that discourage participation?
It doesn't, because the drive for Mary, now remember what I said earlier, like you meet one person with autism, you met one person with autism, right? So it depends on the individual. And that's where having conversations with parents and other things for strategies is smart, getting to really know the individual. But for Mary, we have a good relationship, and I've had this conversation with the whole class. I don't put up with it with anybody jumping in and like, and it seems mean, but like, I can't have, it's 3 to 8 and then 8 to 11, 2 different groups. A 3-year-old to an 8, like I can't have a 3-year-old constantly jumping up and like interrupting everything the 8-year-old says. Right? Like there's 30 kids in the room. Like I gotta have control. I gotta have some rules, classroom rules. So I encourage her to follow the rules. Oh, can you save it? And then if she says, yeah, I can, because and I'm very open with them. I have ADHD, they all know it. And I'll say, you know, my brain, like I have to get I'll forget what I'm gonna say. So you remember, I want to know, I'm very interested. Let me finish what I'm saying before I forget. Okay. call me Sister Atkins. Okay, okay, Sister Atkins, we got you, you know. And then, so that vulnerability piece from the teacher is good. But then I'll say, okay, I'm done with what I was going to say. Now, Mary, I haven't forgotten about you. Does it apply? Does it relate to the lesson? Oh, no. Can you remember it for 5 more minutes? We're almost done. And I want to hear about it right after. Then she'll come and tell me her whole long story. Right. And I was like, here's a piece of paper. Go ahead and write it down. Write down like a few keywords so you don't forget, because I know how annoying that is. So write down your thing. Does it relate to the lesson? We have 2 minutes for sharing, guys, until we got to move on. Do we need to bring out the timer? We have so many hands up. I've got 2 minutes. How many people can we hear in 2 minutes? And I'll set a timer on my phone. And they're like, I think it's this, or I think it's that, or they're dead and they have no expression whatsoever. And then I'm just sitting there, you know, can go either way. But with this scenario, you know, setting up those established things like the notebook and the rules, and I have Post-its that I just hand them if they want to write something down to tell me later. I've given a token reinforcer to Mary when she shares a short story and stays on topic, and she left stickers, and I'd be like, oh, that was so good. It was right on topic. Here's your star sticker for the day. What a great star you are. What a light you are to our class. I just love it when you share, right? She's going to leave that environment feeling like top of the world versus like, oh, here's Mary again. Mary, we got to get back to the lesson. I'm so sorry I have to interrupt you again or whatever. Like that kind of control, it's all about having control. The adult needs to have control of the room, right? And so we also had a situation where her mom would give her like a prize. I think they did mani-pedis after church if she followed the rules. And so she understood that. And that was like, talk about cartwheels. She'd come and show me the next week, look at what my mom did, and like was so excited about her manicure, right? Whatever it is that'll like get them flipping out and so excited, that's what we're going to use. Especially if it's a kid that has never been able to hold in their excitement over a story in their lives, which is where Mary was 3 years ago. Anyway, she's getting ready to move up to the youth program. I think I might end up following her. We'll see. And then I had this reminder here for ideas. And for the sake of time, I might just abbreviate this one. Basically, this happened all the time. Spencer's a cutie pie. I wish I had a picture I could show you, but oh my gosh, he's adorable. And he never looks at you. And so he's sitting, if he was a little kid, sitting on your lap, looking at you and just making his little lovey faces. And he would even like hold your face in his hands and just look at you. And you just knew he was adoring you. And you just want to hug him and whatever, but we don't want him sitting on your lap in class, right? As a 5, 6, 7-year-old, because that's not what 5, 6, 7-year-olds do, right? So looking at the definition of fair, what do I do to help him be appropriate in class and make friends and make connections with his peers? Because as sweet as that is, there's time for that. And it was me, it was his mom. So like, there's time for us to do that later. I can help reinforce that another time. But he was alone. He wasn't getting good or bad attention. And he was just one. And so I would often say to him, I understand you want a hug. I need you to show me that you can sit in your chair quietly, and then I'll come over and talk to you. And maybe we'll go out in the hallway and have a quick hug, right? Or I love how you're sitting in your chair and you're being so quiet. Now, what was it that you wanted? And I call my kids friends all the time, whether they're not, they're my kids too. Like, oh, friend, you said you wanted a hug. Well, I'm so glad you're a part of our class, and I'll do a little side hug, or I'll like give attention that way. If he's seeking attention, no matter how cute he's being, I don't look at him. Y'all, I do not look at him. When he has my face in his hands and I'm trying to like pry him away and put him in his chair, I turn my head and I did not look at him, because guess what? He wanted attention. That was the function of that behavior. And so any kind of attention would be reinforcing it. Seems like a harsh one, right? Who doesn't want hugs from their kid with autism? But there's a time and a place. This is pretty much all the things we've kind of talked about. Spencer had, so you might not think about somebody touching somebody from behind is a big trigger for him. The lights. So I don't have him in here, but in another room I have fluorescence, and the minute that light goes on, he's got his earplugs in, like he's like plugging his ears, like they can hear it, right? And so and they like crackle. If someone has on something that's really beautiful smelling to us, but maybe it's perfume or something, like he could be like plugging his nose, or like hiding his nose, or hiding his nose in my shirt. That kind of thing. So just think about like where those sensory things might kind of fit in. And I already mentioned the chair. The best thing they ever did was make t-shirts that had a stamp in them instead of a tag. Man, gold toe shoes don't have a seam. You need that information. Or gold toe socks. They're men's socks. I don't care. I'd buy them for my 6-year-old. Hike him up to his knees because he wouldn't keep socks on otherwise. Okay, so this is something else, like to build your team. The parents, the teacher for the class. I highly, highly, highly recommend any child that you're dealing with that has a lot of behavioral issues, assign someone to be an assistant and get that person trained. Because if you've got a classroom situation and the teacher's trying to do it all, or maybe there's even 2 teachers, they can't. They'll lose. It'll be chaos. That person, Spencer needed a one-on-one person. And for me, it was me a lot. But we did have people throughout the years that were assigned to him, and I trained them, and it worked really well. The children's maybe a leader in the children's ministry representative, from that leadership, maybe a church leadership representative, maybe Jason or someone else that is over the age group of the child that you're dealing with and working with. Because the whole point of it, again, is to build relationships, to be included, to feel like you're helping this person to be able to worship how they choose, right? And their families, if they're little, to worship how they choose. And that it's not a barrier for them to be able to get the spiritual needs met that they have. And I would meet regularly with this team of people, and I would evaluate goals. I would make sure the assistant got the training. There's probably lots of resources where you live. And then with the goal that parent involvement, if they're supposed to be there by themselves, the parent involvement is being faded out, so they can actually go to class. And then just in conclusion, I wanted to give you a little brief look at what I do for kids, because I think if we can teach the kids about autism in a fun and enlightening way and about inclusion, then they're just going to be much more open to that whole relationship and that whole inclusion process, right? Because I can guarantee you, Erin, if you had one of the other kids in the class wondering, oh, why wasn't Keegan in class today? And you went up to that person and said, well, she forgot her shorts for under her skirt. And you know how annoying it is to sit comfortably in a chair as a girl and not have your shorts on under your shirt. And she couldn't handle it. Didn't want to think about it. They'd be like, I know that feeling. I totally get that. Right? So I do this thing, and I'm kicking myself because I forgot to get my pillow out, but I do this thing. The close your eyes game is basically just like you close your eyes and you think of a time when you didn't belong. You felt like you didn't get invited to play the game on the playground, or you didn't feel included in a conversation. Think about how you felt, right? And then open your eyes and have a discussion. How did that feel? Like, what did that feel good? Or like one word emotions did you feel? And close your eyes again. And I put all this on a pre-marked schedule on a poster board that they can come up and check off with me, because that's how we do things. And close your eyes again and think about a time when you felt very included. Maybe that was with your family or your friends, your baseball team, like you belonged, like you could be yourself. How did that feel? And then they talk about all those feelings. And then we have a discussion about it. So which one is better? Which feeling is better? What makes you more happy and liked and included? And of course, it's very obvious. You want to be a part of the baseball team, right? You want to be a part of the family dynamic. You want to be able to participate in family activities. And I'm actually done with this PowerPoint, so I might step away from it. But I say very carefully to them, and you've got their attention, like they want to know the answer. They want to know where you're going. And I say, people who have autism sometimes have a hard time fitting in, and they often feel different or alone, or like they don't belong, like you felt when you weren't included on the playground, or like you felt when your brother was annoying you in the family thing and you couldn't, whatever it was, whatever story they told me. Like that's how they feel a lot, like most of the time, right? And then we talk about some of the things you and I talked about, people first language and the definition of autism. A little bit different definition for kids. Disability means someone may find things very hard to do because their brain and their body works differently. Very simple. What do you find difficult to do? Disabilities are not contagious. Did you know that you cannot catch autism? That's like one of the most common questions I get from second graders when I give this talk at schools. People are either born with disabilities or they manifest later in life. They come up later and these problems come up later for them, and then they get a diagnosis later. But it's all about, it's inside of them. Okay. And we talk about people first language very similarly to how you and I talked about it. And then when I do it at schools, I often say things like, do you ever have trouble thinking of a word or telling a story, or like, do you always mess up the punchline to a joke? Like, do you ever feel uncomfortable talking in front of a group? Or have you ever been in a situation where you didn't feel like you could talk to anybody about anything and like nobody understood you? That's a big teenager one. Nobody understands me, right? Maybe you just felt lonely and figured that nobody would listen to you anyway, so why bother? Right? Or have you, of course, that's all about communication, right? Or have you ever had the TV on and it was so loud you couldn't think, or like your sister's blaring hairband music in the next room or whatever, Justin Bieber, and you cannot do your homework, right? How many of you really like a tag in your shirt? Or if you wear glasses, do you know when your prescription is changed? Because everything's like blurry and weird and distorted and you get headaches, and again with the sensory, right? Trying to when you stub your toe, do you dance around like a fool? Like, of course we do. That's what we all do. We're like, it hurts, and you can't think about anything else. Trying to like get them to understand that they feel the same way, right? And then, do you have to get dressed in the same way? How do you get dressed? What's your method? What's your shoes? Are you not shoes? Are you a pants person first? Or are you a shirt person first? Or like, do you put your sock on? One sock on, one shoe on, one sock on, one shoe on. Like, that's weird, but if that's you, that's fine. It's your routine, right? Like, it's your routine. Do you mouthwash before or after you brush your teeth? Like, what routines do you have that you're like, I feel weird if I don't do them? And then I put on this crazy birthday hat that has candles. Again, I usually have my visuals. I totally forgot. And we talk about, like, if you've been to a birthday party where you didn't know anybody and you had no idea what to do, and how'd that feel? What might have made you more comfortable? And again, people with autism feel this way a lot. And I'm wearing this silly hat, right? It literally has like birthday candles sticking out of it, like a crown. And they laugh at me and they're like, oh, well, one time, this one girl was so sweet. She said, one time somebody said, the mom said I could hand out napkins, and that was super helpful, right? She included me. She actually used that word, right? They get it, they know. And so the only person that they knew was the kid at the party, but somebody did something small and it helped them not feel so odd in the environment. And if there's teachers in the room, we often talk about adults, this is what birthday dinners look like, right? A lot of times, very awkward, doesn't get any better. Then we have the Tootsie Pop talk, and the idea is that what's all the same about a Tootsie Pop? What's all different about a Tootsie Pop? So they're the same, they have the same stick and they're round and they have that ridge around them and they all have the same paper and the same logo and whatever. They always come up with something. They taste good, they come up with the big list. And I have literally like a Tootsie Pop pillow. And then I say, how are they different? Well, there's only one way they're different, and that's the color. What's the color? The flavor, right? But we're all like that. We're all the same on the inside, whether or not we have a disability. And we all might look or act differently on the outside, but we all have the same feelings on the inside. And we all want to be liked and to have friends and have fun. And by the end of it, they are like excited to meet someone with autism. Like they're like, I have so much in common with people with autism. And of course, we all know that it's a spectrum and we're all on it somewhere. Temple Grandin is a famous autism speaker, and she says, we all have a touch of the brush. Just some of us are more colorful than others. And that's how it is. We're all quirky. We all have things, right, that we do that are like nobody gets. We all have things that we feel awkward about or uncomfortable, or behaviors that other people don't like, right? And it's just a matter of like, true inclusion comes when you can see their issue in yourself and understand it. And so that, I hope that is kind of the point that I was able to bring across to you today, to where we got to figure out what triggered these behaviors. That maybe we throw an extra pair of shorts in the car, always, right? So, and maybe we have a kit. This is the kit that gets you to church. And as we figure out things that are triggering in the car, we throw it in that bag. And then we keep tossing it in the bag. I think ideas of things that might solve a problem before we even get there. And understanding that they're not doing it to be manipulative or obnoxious, or they're not trying to be different and make you uncomfortable, right? They are just trying to get through the day. And music time isn't it. So if we want them to go to music time, then we got to make it to where they can feel loved and reinforced and comfortable there. So anyway, that's all I have, but I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. But I just really appreciate you being willing to listen to my message, and I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dereth. I really appreciate that. Yeah, all your experiences and your stories. And yeah, I know, yeah, I've definitely learned a lot. I'm taking some notes here on visual schedules. To me, it was really interesting, and primary reinforcers. And since nobody has said it to you before, I would like to say it. Dereth, good job sitting in your chair this whole time.
Did you notice I was rocking? I have a rocking chair for a reason. I have a lot of sensory issues.
Yeah.
I have a rocking chair in my office.
There you go.
I sit and work every day.
But yeah, we'll open it for questions. If anybody has some questions, please, yeah, feel free to ask.
I do have a question. So I have a friend with Asperger's, and I'm not quite sure the difference of Asperger's versus just like autism. Well, I guess that was probably my first question, and then I have a follow-up question to it. What's the difference between Asperger's and, say, an autism?
Okay. Will you remember the follow-up? Because I'm taking notes.
Yes.
Okay. So I would not have. So Asperger's is an old term. The diagnostic criteria for autism, it used to be called, there used to be Asperger's syndrome and then autism spectrum, right? Now they just call everything autism. And so there's that little bit of clarification. Now, people with Asperger's syndrome are definitely highly verbal. They have, or what is formerly known as Asperger's syndrome, highly verbal, very much that mentality of like, if you're talking about dinosaurs, like I have maybe 5 things that I can talk about, right? Depending on the age of the person. And the older they are, I don't know how old this person is that you know, but the older they are, the more things they collect that they can talk about, right? And actually people that have what we used to call Asperger's syndrome, a lot of times are diagnosed as an older kid because they're highly verbal. And they'll hold eye contact like nobody's business, as long as you're talking about dinosaurs or rom-coms or whatever it is that they're interested in, right? I mean, my daughter went on a date with this boy and she came home and she was like, oh my gosh, he's on the spectrum. Like I didn't even know, dance with him at like church dances all the time. Didn't even know until they went to see a movie and he started into this 2-hour-long conversation about every movie he'd ever watched. Like
that sounds about right, but it's not. Saying Asperger's isn't like saying LD or mental retardation. It's not insulting. It's just an older term for the diagnosis, correct?
It's hard for me to say. I think it would be individually. That would be something to check with the family or with the person. Like, hey, I heard recently that Asperger's isn't even a thing anymore. Like, what do you think about that? Do you still identify that way, or do you buy into this whole it's all autism business? And just put it out there.
That's a good approach. That's a good way to approach it.
Yeah.
And then my follow-up question is I find with this person, the concrete thinking, everything is very literal, right? So sarcasm doesn't go over well. Sometimes social situations get awkward very quickly. You know,
For you.
oh man, are you guys ever going to leave? Like that would really, really hurt their feelings, because they're like, well, you don't want me to be here. And so I have to be really careful about that. Do you have any tips or suggestions about, you know, trying to navigate that, not hurting someone's feelings?
Yeah, for sure. The first tip is they're not thinking about you as much as you think they are. Just in general, that's humanity. Like, people aren't thinking about you as much as we think that they are. They're not thinking about me. Right. And so like, he's distracted. How old is this person, Ginger?
I would put like mid-30s.
Okay, awesome. So I haven't known very many people, adults with Asperger's. I know teenagers with Asperger's, but I've been in this exact situation where like, hello, it's time to leave my house. And I want to be your friend and I want to, you know, but here's the parameters. Talk about it beforehand. If you're getting on the phone with this person, talk about it beforehand. Oh, I've got 10 minutes. And you know what? I'm actually going to set a timer because, you know, I love talking to you and I get so distracted, totally my brain. And I'm very open about the fact that I have ADHD. I was diagnosed like 3 years ago. So like 2 years ago. So like, oh, you know, I get so distracted. I'm going to forget to leave for this doctor's appointment if I don't have this timer going. So just so you know, I have 10 minutes. Love to hear what you have to say, right? If you're on the phone. If they're at your house, I do the same thing. It's like, oh, please come over. We're going to have dinner or watch the game. But so-and-so has something right afterwards that we have to leave. Or whatever it is, don't lie. I mean, it's tricky, this environment that we are in, right? This is a ministry group. So we don't want to enforce lying. But it's okay to like schedule something right after.
And I think you can also just say, I was thinking you could come over at 5 and maybe we'd wrap up around 8.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. But then they're going to ask you why. Right? Because they want to know all the information. And so I would have an answer ready. Like I would do the prep, what Erin said, that was a great way to say it. I think we'll wrap up around 8 because we got to get to bed. It's a school night or whatever it is. Or, oh, this activity is going to go from 3 to 5. And I didn't go to the grocery store. I have no food for y'all. You got to go home and eat your own food because we're having cereal for dinner, you know? And so we're not going to serve dinner. You're going to come to the game and have snacks, you know, that kind of thing. I would say that what I said at the beginning of my advice was, he's just trying to get through it too. Right. And so giving parameters, giving a little bit of a visual schedule, like it doesn't have to be visual, it can just be verbal. Giving some cues throughout. So it's not like, oh, here's the end, time to leave. Giving cues throughout, like, oh, I just wanted to remind you that I have to leave in 15 minutes, just so you know. So just, you know, maybe that's how you might even do it for a young child, right? Like they don't want to leave the play date and they're going to scream and pitch a fit. And so you give them these reminders throughout the conversation. Oh, remember, you know, you have 10 minutes, you know, that's like an episode of Elmo's World, you know, for my 3-year-old. And then we're going to go. So like, just having that preparation. And so again, they'll be more comfortable too. Your friend will be more comfortable in the situation if he knows what to expect. I think that if none of those tricks are working and he's not getting it, don't like the sarcasm, you're right. Like they're not going to get that at all. But I have been known to say, okay, it's all about the tone for me. I'm very light and fluffy, I feel like, and so I can get away with it. But even just saying, oh goodness, I am so beat. It's been so nice having you guys over. I'm gonna kick you out though, because I got to go to the grocery store. I got to go do this. And I just can't wait till we get together again. When is that going to be? Let's get it on the calendar. Ginger, if you're at my house,
This is for context. This is one of my husband's best friends. So I mean, like,
yeah,
it's not a matter of like we can't get this person to leave their our house, but really just like understanding the context of things. Like, okay, it's time to go. I really appreciate what you're saying though about like that visual schedule and then kind of setting the expectations of what's going to happen. That makes a lot of sense. And actually in the situations, you know, kind of when it has been a little socially awkward, maybe that expectation hadn't been set. Just like, everybody come on over.
well, and watch the tones that you're using, right? Everybody come on over is very open-ended and very like friendly. But if you can say, everybody come on over for a couple hours, same tone, same enthusiasm, but it just slides it in there, right? When Spencer was like 4, I'd always say, let's hit the road. And he'd go outside and start stomping around on the concrete and hitting it. And it took me ridiculous amount of time to realize he was hitting the road. He was hitting the road and wondering why mom was telling him to go hit the road.
He was doing what you told him to.
Exactly. These concrete, literal thinkers, you know, I think you're on the right track. I will say that if it's a friend and it sounds like I don't want to use the word high functioning, but he's very capable in his life and able to manage himself well, right? And have friendships. Also just being very straightforward and saying, hey, John, what's the right thing? Last time when you were here, I kind of needed to go and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. What's a good way, right, to talk to you about it? Because you know I love you.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions?
All right. Well, yeah. Well, if no other questions, then yeah. Well,
Thank you
you
so
again.
much, Dereth.
I really appreciate this. And
That was really fun.
yeah, if you don't mind, I'll close us in prayer here. I appreciate your insights and your experiences here. So we'll lift all those things up and we'll pray together. Good and gracious God, we thank you for this time that we're able to share. We thank you for the things Dereth has learned and shared with us. We thank you, Lord, that you love to be creative and create a diverse and wonderful world and diverse and creative people. And we just pray that you would continue to fill us with the Holy Spirit, that we might have eyes to see and ears to hear those unique ways that you've made each of us, so that we can pay attention and learn to love one another in ways that would glorify you. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for setting this up.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Time. And thank you, Erin, for introducing us to Dereth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to do the youth or children's talk if any of that is useful. The children's one I do, the kids with autism are all there always. So it's not ever anything because it's all about inclusion.
Absolutely. Very cool. That sounds great. Very
great.
Great. Well, blessings on the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.